At 1:19 a.m. on March 8, 2014, en route to Beijing, China's capital, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 suddenly vanished from radar screens, marking the beginning of one of the greatest aviation mysteries in human history. That a massive aircraft, carrying 239 lives, could vanish entirely in an era where radar and satellite surveillance cover the globe 24/7 sounded almost too far-fetched to be real. Yet today, exactly a decade later, it appears that final answers may be coming to light. A series of shocking revelations has emerged. The dead zone in airspace between Vietnam and Malaysia, expert-level radar evasion techniques, the hijacking of the flight crew and passengers, the desperate final call from the co-pilot, and the final resting place of the ill-fated flight. So who is truly responsible for this tragedy? All will be revealed in the following investigation. And as always, before we dive in, to help the ADB Mysteries channel grow, please give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, let's begin. On March 7, 2014, at Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia, on that fateful night, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 was undergoing its final checks before a planned 5-hour and 34-minute journey to Beijing Capital International Airport. The aircraft in service was a Boeing 777-200ER, the world's largest twin-aisle jet. It also held the top safety record among all aircraft models ever produced, powered by 2 Rolls-Royce Trent 875 engines made with advanced lightweight composite materials. The 777-200ER offered exceptional performance, long-range capabilities, and remarkable fuel efficiency. Besides radio communication systems, the aircraft was also equipped with positioning radar, a transponder, and a SATCOM satellite communication system. On that day, there were 227 passengers and 12 crew members on board, representing 14 different nationalities. Among them, 153 were Chinese nationals returning home. 2 Iranian passengers were later discovered to have boarded using fake passports. The flight's captain was Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53, one of Malaysia's most skilled and experienced pilots. He also held a senior position at the national airline. Colleagues described him as a technical expert with over 18,365 flight hours, including 16 years of flying the Boeing 777. Captain Zahari's life revolved around 3 things: family, aviation, and cooking. When off duty, he spent most of his time at home, cooking and using a flight simulator to sharpen his piloting skills. He even maintained a personal YouTube channel where he shared DIY projects and repair tutorials for household appliances. On the surface, the captain appeared to be enjoying a happy marriage with his wife and 3 children. However, rumors suggest that just days before the flight, his wife had filed for divorce after discovering an affair. The co-pilot was Fariq Abdul Hamid, 27, a graduate of the Langkawi Aerospace Academy and professionally trained to become a pilot. MH370 was his final training flight on the Boeing 777, having already logged 2,763 flight hours. At 12:30 a.m. local time, a total of 49,100 kilograms of fuel was loaded onto the aircraft, enough for over 7.5 hours of flight time, 2 hours more than the planned journey. Nearly 5 tons of mangosteen and 221 kilograms of lithium batteries were also loaded into the cargo hold. Although lithium batteries pose a fire risk, reports stated they were packed carefully. Furthermore, this wasn't the first time such items were transported on a commercial flight. The flight plan for MH370 was to head north over the Malaysian peninsula, then cross the South China Sea before arriving in Beijing. At 12:42 a.m., MH370 received clearance for takeoff from runway 32R. MH370, runway 32, good night. The Boeing 777 took off under the bright moonlight. It was also the last time anyone would ever physically see MH370 before it vanished from the world. At 12:42:05 a.m., air traffic control at Kuala Lumpur Airport cleared MH370 to ascend to an altitude of 18,000 feet and proceed directly to a waypoint called Igari. From that point, the aircraft was handed over to Kuala Lumpur Area Control Center on frequency 132.6 MHz. MH370 climb to 18,000 feet, proceed to Igari, switch frequency to 132.6. Good night. Igari. Remember this name because it will be at the heart of our story. This waypoint is surrounded by 5 overlapping airspaces: Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Singapore. At 12:46 a.m., the aircraft contacted Kuala Lumpur and received clearance to climb to 25,000 feet. Kuala Lumpur, this is MH370. Good morning, MH370 climbing to 25,000 feet. Roger, maintain 25,000. At 12:50 a.m., MH370 was cleared to climb to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. MH370 climbed to flight level 350. MH370 Roger. At 1:07 a.m., the captain reported the aircraft was maintaining 35,000 feet. Everything appeared normal. However, just 7 minutes later, the captain repeated the same transmission. MH370 maintaining 35,000. In theory, this second call was unnecessary. Pilots typically only repeat altitude confirmation in 2 situations: if they forgot to confirm earlier and need to restate for safety, if there's a problem with the radio and they fear missing a ground instruction. More importantly, the tone of both transmissions was noticeably different. In the first, the captain spoke in a relaxed manner. In the second, his voice was tense and rushed, as if he was intensely focused on something else. Outside the cockpit, silence reigned. Passengers were settling in or dozing off. At 1:19:24 a.m., MH370 received instructions to transfer control to Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control, Vietnam. Malaysia 370. Contact Ho Chi Minh 129. Good night. The pilot's reply was, "Good night, Malaysia 370." A short phrase, but one that would ignite fierce controversy. According to aviation protocols, when receiving a frequency handover from air traffic control, the pilot is required to repeat the instruction and confirm the frequency. But in this case, the pilot did neither. He simply said, "Good night." It appeared he had no time, or something serious was unfolding in the cockpit. At 1:22 a.m., the aircraft crossed Igari. Just 9 seconds later, it completely vanished. The transponder, which broadcasts the aircraft's location and ID, went silent. Military radar data from the final 37 seconds showed that the plane suddenly veered left in a sharp 180-degree turn, a maneuver that suggests intentional interference with the flight path. Normally, autopilot mode restricts such abrupt changes. A 180-degree turn indicates that the autopilot had been manually disengaged, and the timing was no coincidence. The disappearance occurred right during the handover between Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh City, a period known in aviation as the airspace handoff gap. Malaysian ATC believed their duty had ended. Vietnamese ATC was still waiting for MH370 to check in. It wasn't until 17 minutes later that Vietnamese controllers realized something was wrong and contacted Malaysia. Another aircraft's captain attempted to reach MH370's crew via the international emergency frequency, relaying a request through Vietnam's control tower. But all he heard was a few faint static noises and an eerie silence. So where did MH370 go? Even though the transponder was turned off, Malaysia's military radar, which doesn't rely on transponders, continued to detect MH370 for more than an hour after it vanished from civilian radar. Immediately after the sharp turn, MH370 continued flying southwest across the Malaysian peninsula. Coincidentally, this path took the aircraft between Thailand's ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, and Airway M765, effectively avoiding all incoming flight routes. It's important to note, the ADIZ is monitored by the Thai military. This routing strongly suggests that whoever was piloting MH370 had expert knowledge of airspace boundaries and was deliberately trying to steer the plane clear of detection by all air traffic control (ATC) systems. This theory gained even more credibility as the plane passed over Penang Island, Malaysia. On April 12, 2014, an anonymous investigation group revealed to the New Straits Times that co-pilot Fariq Abdul Hamid had attempted to make a desperate call for help from the aircraft to ground level. MH370 was reportedly flying low enough for mobile phone towers to detect a signal from the pilot's device. However, the connection was weak and quickly lost. The fact that anyone on board attempted a call under such conditions strongly indicates something had gone terribly wrong. On commercial flights, both passengers and crew are required to switch off phones. If the co-pilot was making a call, it likely meant he was no longer inside the cockpit. If you're still unsure, consider another form of evidence, even more reliable than a phone call: the satellite communication system, SATCOM. Like many modern airliners, the Boeing 777 was equipped with SATCOM, a satellite communication system that sends and receives signals from the ground, recording detailed flight data. The system was connected to the Inmarsat network, a UK-based telecom company that provides global mobile communication via 3 geostationary satellites. The Boeing 777-200ER connected to Inmarsat satellites via a device known as the SDU, Satellite Data Unit, installed on the aircraft. At 2:03 a.m., when Malaysian authorities attempted to contact MH370 via satellite message, the aircraft did not respond. According to Australian investigators, this was likely because the aircraft's power had been intentionally shut off. If a pilot or hijacker wanted to hide their actions, they could disable the aircraft's main electrical systems by flipping the bus tie switch and the battery control switch inside the cockpit. This would cut off nearly all power, including communication transmissions. Even if power was cut, the engines would still function normally because they had separate dedicated power sources. But here's the crucial detail. When power is lost, the aircraft automatically attempts to reboot using its APU, Auxiliary Power Unit. To maintain control, the hijacker would have needed to activate the APU, then immediately shut it down again to prevent the plane from restarting satellite communications. This clearly demonstrates that whoever was in control had deep technical knowledge of the aircraft, a highly skilled individual. When all main power is lost, a special emergency device is activated, the RAT, Ram Air Turbine. This small wind-powered turbine, located beneath the aircraft, generates just enough energy to power basic navigation screens, emergency communication, and minimal instrumentation. However, it's not enough to support lighting, radio communications, or autopilot functions. By that point, MH370 had become a ghost plane, silently drifting through the night sky, with no one on Earth knowing where it was. But here's the most chilling question. Why didn't the 239 passengers and crew members resist or react? The most terrifying answer is this. The hijacker took advantage of the night and depressurized the cabin. At cruising altitudes above 33,000 feet, 10,000 meters, when oxygen levels drop, passengers quickly lose consciousness and fall into a coma-like state, even if the oxygen masks were deployed. The masks only provide 22 minutes of breathable air. The cabin-wide oxygen supply lasts only 44 minutes. But the cockpit's oxygen system can function for up to 27 hours. Conclusion: more than 200 people on board were rendered unconscious, completely under the hijacker's control. After neutralizing the crew and passengers, the person in control of the cockpit turned the plane northwest, crossing the Strait of Malacca. MH370 then continued toward a waypoint called Vampi, then followed airway N571 toward the next waypoint, Mekar. Once it passed south of Mekar, at 2:22 a.m., all radar contact, both civilian and military, was lost. From this point forward, the person controlling MH370 began intentionally misleading investigators, trying to make them believe that the plane had possibly crashed in the Bay of Bengal or somewhere in the Andaman Sea. But in truth, their actual goal was to divert the plane toward the Indian Ocean, one of the two deepest oceans on Earth. What the hijacker likely didn't expect, however, was that the aircraft's satellite communication system had silently recorded every movement. At 2:25 a.m., the SATCOM system suddenly reconnected. The SDU, satellite data unit on the aircraft, sent out a login request, a signal that's typically triggered about an hour after disconnection. It's important to understand, SATCOM is programmed to send a ping, a signal to check for connection, once every hour if it hasn't received any messages. The most crucial data came from Inmarsat, the British company providing satellite communication for MH370. They revealed that they had determined the direction of MH370's flight by analyzing the Doppler shift in the pings sent from the aircraft. Even though all primary communication systems had been turned off, one of Inmarsat's satellites still received 7 automatic pings from MH370 over the next 7 hours. The final signal was recorded at 8:11 a.m. on March 8th. Based on an analysis of these pings, the UK's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, concluded that MH370 had continued flying for at least 7 more hours, traveling along a southern corridor toward the Indian Ocean, before ultimately descending somewhere along the 7th arc, west of Australia. To further support this theory, experts pointed to the aircraft's underwater locator beacon, ULB, a device installed to emit acoustic signals when submerged after a crash, with a battery life of up to 40 days. If the impact was strong enough, the ULB would emit signals that could be detected by hydrophones, underwater microphones. And these were some of the sonar-like signals believed to be from MH370. After concluding the plane had likely crashed in the Indian Ocean, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, the Royal Malaysian Navy, Indonesia, the US Air Force, and several other countries launched the largest search operation in aviation history. It also became the most expensive search mission the aviation world had ever witnessed. While no wreckage of the plane itself was found, some debris confirmed to be from MH370 eventually washed up on distant shores. On July 29, 2015, more than a year and 4 months after the disappearance, the first piece of wreckage was discovered. A portion of the aircraft's wing flaperon had drifted ashore on La Réunion Island, a small French territory in the Indian Ocean, about 700 kilometers east of Madagascar. The serial number on the part remained intact, allowing investigators to confirm that it belonged to the only missing Boeing 777 in the world, MH370. More debris was later discovered along beaches in South Africa, Madagascar, and Mozambique, with 41 total pieces recovered. All of this further reinforced the conclusion that MH370 had indeed crashed in the southern Indian Ocean. At this point, many people were asking the same burning question: who was truly behind the hijacking of MH370 and its intentional plunge into the sea? If it were the act of a terrorist organization, surely they would have claimed responsibility, issuing global threats and demands. If it had been a technical failure, the plane would not have been able to fly for such an extended period. And if it had fallen into a black hole or drifted into another dimension, as some wild theories suggested, those ideas were even more far-fetched. From the very beginning of the investigation, many aviation experts, pilots, former pilots, even Australia's Prime Minister, agreed on one leading theory. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was the hijacker. As previously mentioned, Zahari had been facing serious marital problems at the time. Reports indicate his wife had filed for divorce just days before the flight, after discovering he was having an affair. So could it be that he hijacked the aircraft in an act of murder-suicide? One key piece of evidence strongly points in that direction. Shortly after MH370 vanished, authorities discovered a sophisticated home flight simulator running Microsoft Flight Simulator software inside the captain's house. According to a report from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ATSB, someone had used this simulator 6 weeks before the disappearance to fly a nearly identical route to MH370. From Kuala Lumpur, across the Strait of Malacca, then turning south into the Indian Ocean, ending with the aircraft running out of fuel, exactly as investigators believe MH370 did. This was no coincidence. In fact, in 2015, a strikingly similar event occurred with Germanwings Flight 4U9525. In that case, the co-pilot intentionally crashed the plane into a mountain, killing all passengers and crew on board. Why? He had been suffering from severe depression and was suicidal. Before the crash, he locked the captain out of the cockpit and executed his deadly plan. That tragedy demonstrated one chilling truth. Suicide by plane is a very real possibility. If we rule out Captain Zahari, then the only other plausible suspect would have to be someone with expert-level knowledge of aircraft systems, the ability to take over the cockpit, and the skill to manipulate both the electronics and flight path. It's possible they asked the co-pilot to step out to retrieve water or documents, then locked the cockpit door and executed the plan. That would also explain why the co-pilot was later desperately trying to make a phone call, but couldn't get a strong signal. Some sources have even suggested that the CIA may have used advanced surveillance systems to take control of MH370 remotely. To what end? No one knows. And perhaps only those on the inside truly understand what happened. In the Netflix documentary, MH370, the plane that disappeared, multiple theories were explored. But strangely, the film never mentions the pilot suicide theory, which many aviation experts consider the most plausible. Even more controversially, the documentary claimed that Vietnam didn't cooperate in the search, when in fact, Vietnam was one of the first nations to join the hunt for MH370. Regardless of whether it was the captain or someone else in control of the aircraft, one thing is certain. The plane's communication systems were deliberately shut off, and it was intentionally flown into the ocean. This remains the theory most widely supported by the aviation and scientific communities. After all, governments wouldn't spend hundreds of millions of dollars searching such a vast, deep area unless they had solid, reliable data. The truth is, they've likely had their own answers for a very long time. After a decade filled with disappointment, the world had nearly given up hope. But 10 years after the disappearance, a new tracking technology, known as WSPR, has reignited the possibility of finally uncovering MH370's fate. In August 2023, a retired British aerospace engineer named Richard Godfrey, who previously worked with NASA, Boeing, and Airbus, joined forces with Dr. Hannes Coetzee and Professor Simon Maskell of the University of Liverpool, UK. Together, they announced that they had used WSPR technology to trace the final flight path of MH370. WSPR stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. It's a global high-frequency radio signal tracking system that detects and logs interference patterns in the Earth's atmosphere caused by moving objects, including aircraft. Some of its technical characteristics include frequency range, 3 mW to 28 mW, transmission power, 5 watts, transmission duration, 110.6 seconds per cycle. WSPR signals are constantly recorded and stored in a global database, allowing researchers to trace objects, like commercial aircraft, that disturb these weak signal paths. In a 229-page report, the research team identified 130 WSPR signal disturbances over the southern Indian Ocean. What's truly remarkable, these disturbances aligned almost perfectly with the flight path previously simulated by Boeing and the University of Western Australia, using data from the Inmarsat satellites. Richard Godfrey is convinced this is the most credible evidence to date of MH370's final journey. According to the WSPR analysis, the final interference signal ended at a location just beyond the 7th arc, in a section of the ocean never before searched by previous missions. The new coordinates suggest depth, over 4,000 meters below sea level, distance, approximately 1,560 kilometers west of the Australian coast. To verify their findings, the research team conducted a simulated flight with an experienced pilot over the Indian Ocean, varying altitude and speed to avoid radar detection, just like MH370. They then staged a simulated crash at the suspected impact location. The result? The real crash site and the simulated impact site were only 30 kilometers apart. Richard Godfrey told the BBC, "Just one more search, and I believe we'll finally find MH370. On March 8, 2024, marking the 10-year anniversary of the disappearance, the Malaysian government officially announced the relaunch of a new search mission for the ill-fated aircraft. Their goals: to uncover the real cause of the disappearance, to bring closure and answers to the families of the 239 victims. Malaysia's Transport Minister, Anthony Loke, declared that they would invite Ocean Infinity, a US-based marine robotics company, to lead this new expedition. Ocean Infinity previously made a bold promise: "We won't accept any payment unless we find MH370. They've committed to deploying the latest data analysis, the world's most advanced deep-sea scanning technology, and a fleet of unmanned vessels specifically designed to hunt for aircraft wreckage." In addition to Ocean Infinity, another US company, Deep Sea Vision, revealed plans to submit their own search proposal to the Malaysian government by mid-year. Deep Sea Vision recently made headlines when their exploration team claimed to have captured sonar images of the long-lost plane of Amelia Earhart, the legendary female pilot who vanished over the Pacific Ocean 87 years ago. With these technological breakthroughs, renewed international effort, and a no-find, no-fee pledge, the world may finally be on the brink of solving the MH370 mystery.